All right, so Friday we finished up chapter 6. Chapter 6 homework's posted online. I believe it's due Wednesday, I want to say, at 11:55. About the same amount of work as it has been. But today we're going to move on with chapter 7, which deals with the ethical, social, political issues in e-commerce. So within this chapter, a couple objectives we're going to try to complete here. Understand why e-commerce raises ethical, social, and political issues. Recognize the main ethical, social, and political issues raised by e-commerce. Understand the basic concepts related to privacy. Identify the practices of e-commerce companies that threaten privacy. Describe the different methods used to protect online privacy. And understand the various forms of intellectual property and the challenges involved in protecting it. Understand how governance of the internet has evolved over time, and explain why taxation of e-commerce raises governance and jurisdiction issues, and then identify the major public safety and welfare issues raised by e-commerce. It's a little warm in here. All right, so I'm going to start out on page 261. So determining how or whether to regulate behavior on the internet is one of the many ethical and social political issues, obviously by the rapid evolution of the internet and e-commerce. In this chapter, we're going to discuss the ethical, social, and political issues that are raised by e-commerce, then provide a framework for organizing the issues. We're also going to make recommendations for managers who are given the responsibility of operating these e-commerce companies. So we'll start out with 7.1, understanding ethical, social, and political issues in e-commerce. So the internet and its use in e-commerce have raised ethical, social, and political issues, obviously, as we've already discussed. Now, why is the internet at the root of so many contemporary controversies? Pretty much just because of the features of the internet itself and the way it's been exploited by businesses. So pretty much just the way the internet's made up and how the businesses are using the internet to fulfill whatever their needs are. So internet technology and its use in e-commerce disrupt existing social and business relationships and understanding. I think we can see that as the different trends and the differences between traditional marketing or traditional businesses, the brick and mortars, as compared to the internet or the online platform. So table 7.1 is going to actually examine the actual or potential ethical, social, and political consequences of using the internet. And if we recall from earlier in the chapter, this is on page 262, the e-commerce technology dimensions with ubiquity, global reach, and universal standards and stuff of this sort. I'll just read through like the first two, and we'll get the gist of what this chart's talking about. I would take some time to read over it a little bit on your free time, as it could be something used to pull a question for the exam on. So the first here, one of the first unique features of the e-commerce technology is the ubiquity. And obviously that's the internet and the web technology is available everywhere, at work, home, or just anywhere it's available. Bless you. So the potential and ethical, social, political significance of ubiquity is work and shopping can invade family life. Shopping can distract workers at work, lowering productivity. Use of mobile devices can lead to automobile and industrial accidents. So pretty much with this ubiquity of the internet and e-commerce, obviously it can just interfere with our normal lives, as we see a lot of times people are texting and driving or just on the internet, focusing on social sites instead of focusing on the road, stuff of that sort. So it just causes a problem, whereas people do have that access at any time, at anywhere, so they can obviously access it and not pay attention to what they should be paying attention to. The next e-commerce dimension is global reach. So the technology reaches across national boundaries all around the earth. So this reduces cultural diversity in products. It weakens local small firms while strengthening larger firms. And it moves the manufacturing production to low wage areas of the world and weakens the ability of all nations, large and small, to control their information density. So with the global reach here, we can see here that obviously it makes it more difficult for the mom and pops companies because it's harder for them to compete with these large powerhouse corporations that have a global reach. And also the information becomes an issue as well as trying to secure that information because millions and millions of people all around the world can have access to it instantaneously. So we'll go through one more here, just universal standards, one set of technology standards. Obviously, the internet standards being that one set of a standard. So with one standard, obviously, that's going to increase vulnerability to viruses and people hacking into these different networks. And obviously, that increases the likelihood of information being stolen and increases the cost of securing these websites and all of that sort. So we can see, obviously, although there are great things that come about having this internet and this platform to operate on globally and to be able to get our word and product out and communicate with people, but it also opens the door up for a lot of potential ethical issues and social issues, whatever they might be. Obviously, with something good always comes something bad, unfortunately. Now, we live in an information society where power and wealth increasingly depend on information and knowledge as a central asset. Now, controversies over this information are obviously usually disagreements over wealth or influence or other things thought to be valuable to individuals. So obviously, if you have a passion about something and you feel strongly about something, then a lot of times, you might disagree with someone, and it could cause an argument or a controversy over such things. Now, like other technologies, the internet and e-commerce can be used to achieve social progress. However, the same technologies can be used to commit crimes, to spoil the environment, threaten social values. So all these other things can come about as well. Obviously, before automobiles, there wasn't as much interstate crimes, and crime wasn't as much across state boundaries, as people had a more of a difficult time transporting from state to state, or communicating from state to state. And just like that, before the internet, there was no such thing as cybercrime. So a model for organizing the issues. So ethical, social, and political issues are interrelated. And the major ethical, social, and political issues that have developed around e-commerce over the past 15 years can loosely be categorized into 4 major dimensions. These dimensions consist of information rights, property rights, governance, and public safety and welfare. So the 4 major dimensions of e-commerce are information rights, property rights, governance, and public safety and welfare. Now, in each of these aspects of what are dimensions, there's obviously some issues that are raised within each of them. So in regards to information rights, what rights to their own personal information do individuals have in public marketplace or their private homes? When the internet technologies make information, pervasive and efficient. So, and what rights do we have to actually access that information about businesses and firms and other organizations? So obviously, information rights is a big deal here with dealing with e-commerce. We give that information and we want to make sure that it's secure, and at the same time, we want them to be transparent with us if we're going to giving them all the information that they need in order to fulfill whatever their business model is or whatever their operations are. Then we expect the same thing out of them. So information rights is a big thing. Next thing, property rights. How can this intellectual property be enforced in an internet world where copies of protected works could be copied and reproduced like rapidly. So obviously, property rights. How are these intangible properties going to be protected? And when people can just pretty much just be invisible out there and just steal it, copy it, and reproduce it. Governance. Should the internet be subject to public laws? And what lawmaking bodies or what type of these authorities would have jurisdiction over it? Would it be at a state level, a federal level, or international level? Myself personally, I think if there was a more strict governance, it should be more of an international, or all three play an important role together. So public safety and welfare. So what efforts should be undertaken to ensure that the internet and e-commerce channels have equal access for all users, so that all users have are not it says that some users aren't denied the basic access to the internet. And should the governments be responsible for placing the internet and access to the internet in schools and in the public systems? So stuff of that sort. So public safety and the welfare. So before examining the four dimensions of e-commerce, we're going to look at some of the basic concepts of ethical reasoning that can be used as a guide to obviously making some ethical decisions. So some of the basic ethical concepts are going to be responsibility, accountability, and liability. These are all some terms that we're all familiar with. So obviously ethics is going to be at the heart of the social and political debates about the internet. And ethics is the study of principles that individuals and organizations use to determine what is a right or wrong course of action that could obviously be taken. Now, extending ethics from individuals to business firms can be difficult, but is not impossible. As long as there is a decision-making body or individual, then their decisions can be judged against a variety of ethical principles. So obviously, if there's a group of people or an individual, and no matter what it is you're doing, you're always going to be confronted with different situations, and ultimately you have to decide on how you're going to act within the given situation. Now, in Western culture, there are three basic principles: responsibility, accountability, and liability. Responsibility means that as a free moral agent, individuals or organizations and even societies are going to be responsible for the actions that they take. Accountability is that individuals and organizations and societies should be held accountable for the actions that they've done, for the consequences of their actions. And liability extends the concepts of responsibility and accountability, obviously into the area of law and litigation. So liability is a feature of political systems in which the body of law in place permits individuals to recover damages done to them by other people's actions or torts or whatever they might be. Due process is a process in which laws are known and understood, and that the ability to appeal to higher authorities to ensure that the law is being followed as it should be, pretty much. So just a couple basic ethical concepts there, just to be familiar with. Now, some of the ethical principles that we're going to go over here are kind of just little ethical principles that are kind of common or understood in pretty much in a bunch of countries around the world. So the first one of these ethical principles is known as the Golden Rule. So obviously, do unto others as if it is how you'd be treated yourself. So just treat others how you want to be treated, pretty much. Universalism. If a certain action isn't right for all situations, then probably the best thing to do is just stay away from that. So pretty much is saying there, if it's not right for all situations, then it's probably not right for that individual one. The slippery slope, this principle states that if an action cannot be taken repeatedly, then it's not right to take it all. So pretty much it's it's saying here that once you start down a wrong path, a lot of times it's hard to change. You find yourself starting to fall deeper and deeper into it. So one bad decision tends to lead to another in order to cover that other decision up, and before you know it, you're just in the middle of a mess. Collective utilitarian principle. So take action that achieves the greater value for all society. So we want to do something that's going to obviously better all society and not just ourselves. A lot of times we tend to take action and only think about ourselves a lot of time. But when dealing with ethics and trying to be fair to others, we need to try to make a decision that's gonna benefit the society as a whole instead of just a certain sector of it. Risk aversion is take the action that produces the least harm or the least potential cost. And no free lunch is another one of the ethical principles. So obviously if there is some type of data or a song or a book or something out there, then we just need to assume that if we're going to use that information or property or whatever it might be, that someone put some hard blood, sweat, and tears into pretty much creating that property. So we're going to assume that they're going to want to be compensated for their time and effort, and not just take their work without giving them any compensation for doing so. The New York Times test, the perfect information rule. So this is just assuming that whatever action you would take in a situation is going to hit the front page of one of the major either a newspaper or a news network, whatever it might be. So just pretty much just assuming that the information does come about to the public's eye. So just assume that whatever you're doing in the dark will come to light, pretty much is what the New York Times test is. The ethical principles is stating there. And the social contract rule. So would you like to live in a society where the principle you're supporting would become an organizing principle of the entire society? So pretty much, is this going to rule that you're forcing for other people to follow? Is that going to be something that you would like to follow yourself? So obviously none of these rules are an absolute guide, and there can be exceptions when applying them. But the actions obviously are actions that don't pass these guidelines of just some of these basic ethical principles. Obviously, you should give extra thought into them, as these principles are pretty much universally known across many nations. And they make sense, as obviously most people would want to be treated how they want to be treated, and don't want to adhere to a bad set of rules or anything that would be unfair to certain individuals. So now that we have an understanding of some of the basic ethical reasoning concepts, we need to take a closer look at the major types of the ethical, social, and political debates that have arisen in e-commerce. So we'll move on to 7.2, privacy and information rights. So privacy is the moral right of individuals to be left alone, obviously free from surveillance or whatever it might be, someone spying on us. Just privacy is the right to be left alone. And obviously that would make information privacy a subset of privacy, which is the right for information privacy is the claim that certain information should not be collected at all by governments or businesses, and the claim of individuals to control the use of whatever information that is collected about them. So pretty much information privacy, just certain information that we feel shouldn't be collected by people, and if it is collected, then ultimately we should be able to control how they use that information that they've collected from us. Now, due process also plays an important role in defining privacy. So there are actually two kinds of threats to individual privacy that's going to be posed by the internet. One threat originates in the private sector and ultimately concerns how much personal information is collected by the commercial websites, and then how it's ultimately going to be used. Another threat originates in the public sector, and this is actually going to be concerned with how much personal information the federal, state, and local government authorities collect and how they use it. Now, in practice, the federal government actually relies on internet companies to provide intelligence on specific individuals and groups. And today, the public discussion of privacy has broadened from a concern about tracking the behavior of individuals while they use the internet to include the impact of mobile devices for tracking the location of people. Obviously, this is going to be done by their smartphones, and also collecting information on their personal behavior, including locations they visited. So I think everyone knows how this is done as well. When you have your tracking thing on your cell phone, or even when it's off, you can be identified by location of where you're at. Another thing is too, like in that regards, I guess the iPhone is the ones that has the tracking device that you can put on your phone. If you lose it, you can actually track where your phone's at. So pretty neat, but at the same time pretty scary to think that they can know everything you're doing at all times. So private and government investigations have found both Apple and Google are collecting personal location and behavior data, and maybe even sharing this information with marketers and government agencies. And it says that cell phone carriers receive more than 1 million requests each year from law enforcement agencies for call data. And that's really, I think that's almost absurd if you think about it, that they're that concerned with what's going on. I mean, I get it. There are criminals out there that are breaking the law and some skeptical or fishy activities going on. But I just think that's a little intrusive into our privacy myself personally. I think the government's gotten a little too big and out of control, which is just my take personally. So the major ethical issues related to e-commerce and privacy include the following. Under what conditions should we collect information about others? And what legitimates the intruding into others' lives through the surveillance or online tracking programs, market research, or other means? And do people have a right to be informed when they're being tracked, or when they're being recorded? And the major social issues related to e-commerce and privacy are going to concern the development of the expectations of privacy, or privacy norms, as well as public attitudes. So the major political issues related to e-commerce and privacy concern the development of statutes and that govern the relations between the record keepers and individuals. So next, some of the information that's collected at these e-commerce sites. So e-commerce sites collect a variety of information about consumers who visit their site or make purchases. So that leads us on to personally identifiable information, which is data that can be used to identify or locate an individual. And other data is anonymous information, which is composed of demographic and behavioral information, obviously such as age and your occupation, wherever you live, or what gender you are, ethnicity, stuff of that sort. And obviously there's other data as well that's going to be coming into play here, such as like what you like to browse on the internet, so we can see what type of stuff your personal interests are. So it helps just to actually identify who we are. Now, advertising networks and search engines also track the behavior of consumers. So I mean, if you think about it, it's really kind of scary all the information you have to give an e-commerce company when you're checking out or doing any of that stuff, because they really do have to know a lot of information about who you are to even make sure that that you are who you are, and so you can actually use your credit card or whatever it might be. So social networks and privacy. So obviously social networks pose a challenge for the maintenance of personal privacy, obviously because they're encouraging people to get on there and put your business out there and share it and get likes and just interact with other people. So this has obviously created a database of friends and preferences, likes, posts, and activities. So people who participate in social networks obviously voluntarily give up their information online. So then in a way they're giving up their rights to personal privacy. So really how could they claim an exception or an expectation of privacy when pretty much everything's being shared, when that's the whole point of the site? So social network participants do have a strong expectation of privacy, obviously, in the sense that they want to control how their information is used. And people who contribute the user-generated content also feel that they have an ownership over that content because they're the ones that put it out there and it pertains to themselves. And that they don't want it to be diminished by posting the information, on social network of for one of their friends, or just making it used for another area in which they didn't originally intend it to be used to begin with. So next is mobile and location-based privacy issues. So as the mobile platform becomes more and more important, obviously issues about its location-based privacy are also becoming a major concern. So apps on both Android and Apple smartphones share user information with advertisers that are obviously seeking to target their ads by location, time of day, and personal data shared with the app. Next is profiling and behavioral targeting. Profiling is the creation of digital images that characterize online individuals or group behavior. I'm on page 270 right now. Anonymous profiles identify people as belonging to highly specific or targeted groups. Personal profiles add a personal email address, postal address, or phone numbers to behavioral data. So when we get something that looks like it's tailored towards us, a lot of times they'll have general characteristics about ourselves. They don't really, know if per se if that's truly what our characteristics are, but to make it seem more of a tailored approach and seem more like, they really are just talking to us, they'll just slap a name or something that'll identify us on some of this data. So more and more online firms are linking their online profiles to personal offline consumer data that is collected by database firms that tracks information such as credit card purchases and established retail and catalog firms as well. Now the online advertising networks have added several new dimensions to established offline marketing techniques. They have the ability to precisely track not just consumer purchases, but also browsing behavior on the web. They can dynamically adjust what the shopper sees on screen, including prices. And they can also build and continually refresh high-resolution data images or behavioral profiles of consumers. So pretty much it's pretty cool. I mean, they can really tailor, their advertising directly to you and try to just show you whatever they have available, whatever they think would be tailored to whatever your needs or desires are. Other advertising firms have created spyware software that, when placed on a consumer's computer, it can actually report back to the advertiser's server all that internet users use online, and it's also used to display advertising on the consumer's computer. So network advertising firms are going to argue that web profiling benefits both consumers and the businesses. They're saying it benefits the business because they don't have to waste ads and waste money on advertising to waste to someone that's going to be a waste of time because they're not interested in it. So it helps them save money by only advertising directly to people who they feel is the right consumer to be advertising to, or the right person to be advertising to. And they're saying that for the argument of the consumer that, it benefits them because they're not in turn having to waste time or being shown ads that they're not interested in. So they're saying that that's the benefit of it. Now, obviously, critics argue that profiling undermines the expectation of anonymity and privacy that most people have when using the internet. And it also changes what should be a private experience into one where people are being tracked for every move that they have. In most cases, the profiling is invisible to users and hidden, so consumers are not even aware of when they're actually being tracked. So the pervasive and unregulated collection of personal information online has obviously raised significant fears and opposition among consumers. So obviously, contrary to what the advertising industry has said, the public really does care about the online privacy. And there is a long history of opinion polls that document that the public's fear of losing control over their personal information when they actually visit these sites and make purchases. And more than 2/3 say they have stopped doing business with an online company because of privacy concerns. So just for a second here, I'm going to go back to table 7.2 on page 267, and just, since we're talking about some of this privacy and stuff that people were concerned about being collected, table 7.2 just shows a list of some of the personal information that's actually collected by these e-commerce sites. I won't read all of them, but if we can see here, it's, I started on the left column here. We got the name and address, phone number, email address, social security number. So, obviously that's all vital information there. Next, you got your gender, your age, occupation, location, stuff of that sort, education, preference status. So, I mean, pretty much, the scope of what they're collecting is pretty much everything, and pretty much long and short. And if you put all three of those columns together, then we can see how they can actually tailor these ads towards us, because they know what price range that we would be willing to spend because of our income, gender, obviously, where we live, social security number, bank accounts, all that stuff, our educational level, so we can see how they can really use this information to tailor their products towards us, or their advertisements towards us. So next, I'm going to just glance at table 7.3 on page 268. The internet's major information gathering tools and their impact on privacy. So how are they actually gathering that information? So the first thing, the first internet capability is smartphones and apps. And the impact on privacy would be that it tracks our location and the shared photos, addresses, phone numbers, stuff of that sort. Another one is social networks. This obviously they gather personal information about us. So that makes the information out there to the public. Another one is spyware. It records all the keyboard activity of a user. So, I mean, think about how pervasive that is. I mean, you can't even type messages or anything without everything being tracked. So that's just a little bit of the internet's major information gathering tools and how they go about actually collecting information, and then what some of the impacts on the privacy are. So as we can see, just with all the information they're collecting and all the different tools and techniques that these companies are using, why this could be an ethical or a political or social phenomena that's happening because of the actual structure of these e-commerce sites. That's actually all that I have for today. I don't want to get too far ahead. I want to pace ourselves good on this chapter. So on Wednesday, we'll pick back up on page 271 on the internet and government invasions of privacy, with dealing with e-commerce surveillance. And just remember, everyone, that chapter 6 homework is due this week as well, I believe Wednesday evening.